more on this day of Anglo-French summitry. President Macron said the British people had been sold a lie over Brexit, which had made returning migrants to France harder over the years. He didn't, by the way, mention the French police who can't go into the water. There was no mention of that. There's to be greater cooperation on nuclear weapons, as we've heard, and a small boats deal. Here's a little bit.
It must be understood that since Brexit, I say this also with honesty because I know this is not the case for you, Mr. Prime Minister, but many people in your country explain that Brexit would mean that you could more effectively fight against illegal immigration. Put simply, it has been since Brexit the United Kingdom lost its migration agreements with the European Union. The current situation is therefore the exact opposite of what the Brexiteers proposed, or promised rather.
Let's get the readout from Nick. I mean, is this a sort of... We're hearing a round of applause from our independent-minded guests for this summit.
Well, I mean, I can exclusively reveal that Emmanuel Macron does not and did not like Brexit. And the reason why he didn't like Brexit is because he regarded it as a populist spasm, and he regards himself as Europe's principal leader of taking on populism. I mean, Georgina will know there was a very famous speech he gave at Versailles, which went on for a very long time, and it was absolutely his sort of essay against populism. So that's why he feels so strongly about it. But essentially, this point about the British people were sold a lie and Brexit has made it more difficult to deal with migration, it's sort of a mixed bag, because if we were in the European Union, we would be in the Dublin Convention. And the Dublin Convention means that if you land in the European Union from outside the EU and you want to claim asylum, you have to do it in the first country you enter. That usually works sort of better in theory than in practice. It is certainly true that cross-channel crossings on these boats have gone up since Brexit, but the argument against that was that the post-Brexit checks were very, very good at eliminating the irregular crossings through lorries and through the channel. So it's sort of a bit like that. OK,
well, let's talk about the one-in, one-out deal. Live to former Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration, John Vine. Welcome back to Newsnight, John. What do you make of all this this deal about one in, one out? Can you make sense of it all? It sounds a bit like the hokey cokey.
Well, it's a deal in principle, I believe, because I think the EU has a say in whether it actually happens or not. But the whole idea is that, you know, France will send us somebody who has asylum rights in the UK, and we will send them back somebody who's arrived here illegally. And I believe it's going to be a pilot scheme with about 50 people a week being involved in the initial stages. Now, look, it's a first, really, to get France to actually take anybody back who's arrived here illegally. So I think that's an achievement in itself, in principle, getting that principle established. But it's not going to be a deterrent unless there are considerable numbers involved, because I think the people who are giving their life savings to organised crime to get to the UK are not going to be deterred unless there's a reasonable chance that they're going to be one of those people who are returned to France.
So, in other words, were you someone who could see the logic in the Rwanda deal that our current Prime Minister dismissed as a gimmick? Was that a deterrent more than this thing they've come up with today?
Well, it was an attempt by the previous government at doing exactly the same thing, at deterring people from, you know... getting in and using this method to get into the country. Okay, so, and it was a new idea, but it failed.
No, all right. Well, everything's been failing. Rishi Sunak said it was a failure to say he could stop the boats. What about the silence from the French president on the police tactics, standing on the beach looking very Gallic whilst people get onto taxi boats? Should there have been more conversation about that between these? Can't friends be honest and say these things?
Well, yes, I think what I would have liked to have seen is some confirmation that what we saw recently, where a specialist unit, I think, of the French police started, knifing about in order to try and sink it. Is that going to be the way forward? Is that going to be common practice? I believe that I think French police officers are very wary of going into the water with all their kit. And I think what police officers will want is to see some top cover from politicians if, for example, these tactics are deployed and somebody drowns.
Yes, so it wasn't so much a case of stop the boats as pop the boats. That's what was happening, Georgina. And is it fair of us to put criticism the way of the French? We're meant to be friends. Why can't we say get in the water?
Because it's a really difficult question. I mean, we've been trying to resolve it for years. I think...
Well, failing to resolve it for years because the French keep blaming us for voting for Brexit. But why? It's their beach.
But I think it's more complicated than that. And actually, politically, this is really important. It is a pilot programme. We'll have to see technically if it works. But politically, having the French say, OK, we're going to talk about readmission. And the fact that, you know, President Macron in the press conference today said, I have spoken to my European counterparts about this because, of course, immigration is a salient issue across the EU. And this is the other thing that we forget with France. Sometimes there is criticism levelled at the fact that they're not taking this seriously. But for them, immigration is so much more than small boats. They have lots of people coming in through Italy and through Spain, and that sort of matters almost more at the political level in France.
So, Alex, people who come in without documentation, do they pose an intelligence-based threat? Do we know that many of them, some of them are malevolent actors?
No, I don't think that's particularly I mean, in some cases that will be true, but I think it's much more about societal acceptance of this level of immigration. And the documentation point is a key one. I think the existence of a black labour market and the absence of ID cards in the UK and English language is a set of really big pull factors here which need to be considered along with all the gang stuff that the Prime Minister talks about a lot.
John Vine, you're nodding, my colleagues who can see you, at what Sir Alex is saying. Are you someone who backs an ID card? John, the British have long been against that. Have you changed your mind?
Yes, I have changed my mind, actually. The first thing that the Conservative Liberal coalition did in 2010 was to scrap the embryonic ID card scheme. And I think that, in hindsight, was a big mistake. Every other country in Europe has something like this. And I think President Macron was very frank, actually, in his discussions earlier this week, when he was saying, well, there are tremendous pull factors for the UK. It's not just the English language. It's the fact that there's a thriving grey economy in this country. And people seem to arrive here and slip into that grey economy very easily because we don't really know who they are.
Yeah, but now I'm confused because I was happy blaming the French, Nick, and now it's decisions we've taken here. We don't have an ID card. We don't know how many people are here. We don't know where they are. We don't know when they leave. I can't blame the French now.
No, difficult for you. And, of course, Tony Blair was rather keen on ID cards, but I seem to remember that the Cameron Conservatives weren't very keen on that when they were in their sort of civil liberties phase, so that didn't happen. And that is one of the things that Emmanuel Macron was talking about, the so-called pull factors of a very liberal economy, an economy created by their favourite person in France. Who is that? Madame Thatcher.
Yes. No, this film, Hello, Hello, you know, your papers, please, it has a lot to answer for. It's created this weird anathema. It's absolutely obvious to me that people should have a digital identity. And in that context, the grey labour force won't exist. And we've removed a pull factor. So let's stop shouting at the French. A lot of this is on us. So
just so that I don't miss the news on Newsnight, Alex Younger's calling for a British ID card.
Yes.
Georgina, I'm shocked because I was beginning the programme by blaming Macron, and now I've got to look at my own country for solutions to this crisis.
Well, I think with crises like this, there's always blame on both parts and there's responsibility on both parts. And I think that's one of the big frustrations in France around this topic, is that they feel that the British political class, but also the media, are at them for failing to control their beaches. But actually, it's much more complex than that, precisely for all the reasons that Sir Alex has mentioned.
Can I briefly do my BBC bit? Just to be fair to the French government on their policing, the government statement today did say the French government are working to implement new ways of cracking down on small boats, including a review of their maritime tactics so that their operational teams can intervene on the water, ensuring taxi boats that pick up migrants waiting in the water can be stopped.
So let me get a final word from you both, because we'll lose you, unfortunately, Georgina, after this. I don't call this a bad summit. It was a impossible 5 years ago. Division in Europe's good for Putin. Whatever the viewers may think, how they divide on this deal, it's better than Liz Truss saying we don't know whether the French are friend or foe, which happened. Our British Prime Minister said that just within living memory.
Yeah, I think it's a good day for Franco-British relations. And, 2 years ago, it was about restoring trust. And today it was about delivering and showing that we can do more together.
There's a dirty secret here. Britain and France are much, much more similar than we care to acknowledge. And our futures are tied together, and this is evidence of that.
I haven't seen it written down quite as clearly as this. I'll just do the final word. It said here that we can't see a way in which an acute threat against one country is not an acute threat against the other. And They didn't say that when I was a student studying this in the 80s, but they're now saying it now. They've found the new language. Thank you very much, Georgina. We hope to see you again, but we'll press on with our other subjects today.